Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining me here on the Royal House of Ra. I am your host, Amenhotep Khufu El Ra. Today's show, we're going to discuss about the rulers of empire. And this is the New Kingdom period, which the New Kingdom period started from 1570 BC to 1070 BC. Okay, so we're going to start with that. Now, this is Kemet's zenith. And what I mean by that is this is Kemet's golden age. This was the age of empire. This was the expansion of the Kemetic nation, expansion of their territories, having those who paid homage to them, the conquests of pharaohs. For example, like Ahmose I, Tuthmosis III, who is considered the Napoleon of Kemet, Ramses II, known as Ramses the Great, Ramses III, who repulsed the sea peoples from preventing them from invading Kemet and crushing them. Okay, so and the great temples and monuments that was built in the discoveries and many other things that was going on in this period. So this is because we just left the second intermediate period, which consists of dynasties 15th, 16th, and 17th. As you remembered, dynasty 15th was the dynasty of the Hyksos, and the 16th was like a I wouldn't say there was so much of Hyksos, but they were like a sub kingdom within Kemet, because Kemet was divided at this time. And then the 17th dynasty was the Theban dynasty. These were the indigenous dynasty, the 17th dynasty. Now we're going into the other indigenous dynasties, which was the 18th, 19th, and 20th dynasties, which were also indigenous dynasties, but these dynasties were the great dynasties of Kemet. These were the empire dynasties. So we're going to go into that. Now I'm going to do two parts of this, because there's in dynasty 18 there are 14 pharaohs of this dynasty. So what I'm going to do in part one, which part one is today, I'm going to discuss 7 pharaohs of that dynasty. And those 7 pharaohs that I'm going to discuss of that dynasty would be Ahmose I, Amenhotep I, Tuthmosis I, Tuthmosis II, Tuthmosis III, Queen Hatshepsut, and Amenhotep II. So those are the first 7 pharaohs of this dynasty, the 18th dynasty I would discuss. And then in part 2, I would discuss the last 7 pharaohs of this dynasty. And the last 7 pharaohs of this dynasty is Tuthmosis IV, Amenhotep III, Amenhotep IV, which is also known as Akhenaten, and the pharaoh Smid-Kare, Tutankhamen, and Horem, which was the last pharaoh of this dynasty, and also who was the pharaoh right after Tutankhamen. So we're going to divide them into 2 parts. I'm going to do that through the whole series of the Empire series of this, because in Dynasty 19 they have 8 pharaohs. So I'm going to divide that into 2 parts and discuss about 4 pharaohs each of that dynasty. So The first part would be the first four, and then the last part would be the last four. And then in Dynasty 20, there's 10 pharaohs of that dynasty. So I'm going to split it into two parts. The first part would be the first 5 pharaohs of that dynasty, and the second part would be the last 5 pharaohs of that dynasty. So that's how I'm going to do it. Okay, now before we go on, I want to say thank you to those who subscribe to my show, and also thank you for those who like the show and share the content as well. As I stated before, it is free to look at this, to hear look at the videos of this show, and to look at this podcast. It is free. It doesn't cost you anything, so it doesn't cost you to click onto the like button, click onto the share button, and also click onto the subscribe button as well. All right, so let's get into the show here and discuss what we're going to talk about. Now, we're going to talk about Dynasty 18. Now, as I mentioned, this is the Empire Age. This is the great period of Kemet. Now, the dynasties that come after the Empire Age would be the dynasties, Dynasty 21 and 22. That would be during the time Kemet is going through its decline. So, but further ado, let's get to this right now. There can be little doubt that the pharaohs of the New Kingdom, spanning half a millennia of Kemetan history, were indeed godlike beings on earth. Their immense works, temples, and fortresses have left their stamp upon the face of Kemet. We can gaze upon many of their actual faces, for by a strange quirk of fate, the despoiled mummies of the major pharaohs of the period were preserved hidden in 2 great caches of bodies found in the last century at Deir el-Bahari and in the tomb of Amenhotep II in the Valley of the Kings. Here lay Tuthmosis III, the Napoleon of ancient Kemet, Ramses II, great soldier, builder, and the original of Shelley's Artemistus, I can't pronounce that name well, King of Kings, and Ramses III, who repulsed the sea peoples and left graphic representations of his land and sea battles at Medinet Habu. There are other, perhaps to some people, more emotive names. Akhenaten, was he a heretic, the first monolithic in history, or simply a religious maniac? And most famously, the pitiful remains of the boy pharaoh Tutankhamun, found in his virtually intact tomb in the Valley of the Kings in 1922, surrounded by gold, his slim teenage body encased in a solid gold coffin. So this gives you a clear indication what we're going to discuss here. This is a great period of Kemet history, and we're going to really go into this, and I hope that you enjoy. If you leave a comment, please be respectful when you leave a comment. You can have a civil discourse, but have it in a civil manner when you leave a comment. Okay, so but if you leave a rude comment, I'm gonna tell you, I'm gonna put you on blast. So let's get into this. We're gonna start with the first 4 pharaohs of the 18th dynasty, and then we'll go to the next three pharaohs of this dynasty, and then we will end it there. And then episode 19, which would be part 2, will discuss the last pharaohs of this dynasty, the 18th dynasty, and that will air on Monday, the 14th at 5 p.m. Central Time, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 4 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, and 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Okay, so let's get into this. Now, the 18th dynasty began 1570 BC to 1293 BC. We're going Ahmose I reigned 1570 BC to 1546 BC. Amenhotep I reigned 1551 to 1524 BC. Tuthmosis I reigned 1524 to 1518 BC. And Tuthmosis II reigned 1518 to 1504 BC. Okay, we're going to start out, excuse me, with Ahmose I. With the expulsion of the Hyksos, the princes of Thebes now reigned supreme. The war against the Hyksos had not been without cause. Ahmose lost his father, Tal, and his brother Tuthmos within about 3 years of each other, leaving him heir to the throne at a very young age. His mother, the redoubtable Queen Amenhotep, was a powerful force in the land and may have been co-regent with him in the early years of his reign. After expelling the Hyksos, Ahmose was faced with the task of consolidating Kemet's borders, which he did with a series of rapid campaigns that sealed the Syrian border and brought Nubia Kush to heel. There must also have been much to do domestically, and Ahmose seems to have devolved a great deal of the responsibility on to local governors in the nomes. He encouraged support for his regime with gifts of land, as recorded by Ahmose, son of Ibana, in his tomb at El Kab, and initiated temple building projects, the best evidence of which comes from remains and inscriptions at Abydos. Manetho gives Ahmose I a reign of 25 to 26 years, which is substantiated by Josephus, who allocates 25 years and 4 months to the king. After his death, Ahmose was buried in the Dra Abu el Naga area of the Theban necropolis in front of the Theban hills. Curiously, although his well-preserved mummy was found in the Great Royal Cache of 1881, and Wallace Budge brought a unique limestone portrait, Ashhabati, of the king for the British Museum in the 1890s, the location of his tomb is unknown. Amenhotep I. Amenhotep I, who reigned for a quarter of a century, like his father Ahmose I, has left us few records. According to Ahmose, son of Ibana, the king led a military expedition to Kush, where His Majesty captured that Nubian Chile in the midst of his army. A contemporary of Ahmose at El Kab, Ahmose Pin Nunklet, also mentions a Nubian campaign and possibly a Libyan one. The king initiated building work at the Temple of Karnak, too, as is attested in the autobiography inscriptions of Inni, the architect, chief of all works at Karnak, Theban tomb, 81. Amenhotep appears to have been the first king to take the radical decision to site his mortuary temple away from his burial place. The location of the latter, however, is uncertain, for although an uninscribed tomb at the Dra Abu el Nega has been assigned to him, some suggest that a small, undecorated, and anciently robbed tomb in the Valley of the Kings belonged to him. Wherever the tomb was, the mission of inspection in year 16 of Ramses IX reported it to be intact, according to the Abbot Pabilis. Like his father Ahmose, Amenhotep I's mummy was found in excellent condition in the 1881 royal mummy cache. Tuthmosis I. Amenhotep I was succeeded not by his son, a break with tradition that would usually indicate a change in dynasty, but by a military man, Tuthmosis, already in middle age when he achieved supreme power. He may have partly legitimized his rule by acting as co-regent with Amenhotep in the last years of the old king's reign. His main claim to the throne, however, was through his wife, the Princess Ahmose, who was the daughter of Ahmose I and Queen Ahmose Nefertari. Since ancient Kemet was a millennial society, he had thus married into the royal bloodline. So, Tuthmosis I was not related to the pharaohs of this dynasty. As it mentioned, for him to solidify his right to rule on the throne, he had to marry a female relative of the member of this dynasty in order to legitimize his right to ascend to the throne. So with Kemet, it is a millennial type of society. So in order for you to be legitimized, you have to have a royal female who is a member of that dynasty. We go into that some along the way to explain that a little bit further. Although Tuthmosis had a short reign of only about 6 years, it was marked by a series of brilliant military campaigns that were to set the seal on most of the rest of the 18th dynasty. Presumably, some start of preparations must have been made in the last years of Amenhotep I for Tuthmosis to have been able to inaugurate his military movements so rapidly and effectively. Ahmose, son of Ivana, was still on active service during this period, and he recounts how he was promoted to admiral, was highly successful in the Nubian campaign and returned therefrom with that wrenched Nubian troglodyte being hanged head downward at the prow of the barge of his majesty. Under Tuthmosis, the grip of the priests of Amun at Karnak began to take hold, as the king extensively remodeled and restored the great temple to the chiefs of the gods under his architect Inanni. On his great Abydos still, Tuthmosis records not only his vast building work there, but also the fact that I made the boundaries of Kemet as far as that which the sun encircles. I made Kemet the superior of every land. Okay, Tuthmosis II. Tuthmosis I died in about 1518 BC, leaving behind a complicated situation. His successor to the throne, his two elder sons, the princes Ahmose and Amenhotep, predeceased their father, so the young third son became heir, also called Tuthmosis. The new king was son of a minor royal wife, the princess Amenhotep, sister of Tuthmosis I, Queen Ahmose. In order to strengthen the youngster's position, therefore, he was married to his half-sister Hatshepsut, elder daughter of Tomosus the Third and Queen Ahmose. Together, Tuthmosis II and Hatshepsut reigned for about 14 years until he died in his early 30s. Despite his apparent poor health, the king persecuted successful campaigns in both Syria and Nubia, attested by a short inscription in the temple at Dar el-Bahri and a rock inscription at Aswan. Old retainers such as Inanni, the architect, were still serving the court. I was a favorite of the king in his every place. I attained the old age of the reverend. I possessed the favor of his majesty every day. I was supplied from the table of the king with bread. Tuthmosis II had one son likewise, Tuthmosis by Isis, a harem girl. He may also have had a daughter, Neferure by Hatshepsut. The king must have realized the overweening ambition of his wife and half-sister, and endeavored to curtail it by declaring his son his successor before he died. In the event, Tuthmosis III was still a young child when he succeeded to the throne, and his stepmother and aunt Hatshepsut initially acted as regent for the young king. As Inanni autobiography noted, his son Tuthmosis III stood in his Tuthmosis II's place as king of the two lands, having become ruler upon the throne of the one who begot him. His sister, the divine consort Hatshepsut, settled the affairs of the two lands by reason of her plans. Kemet was made to labor with bold head for her, the excellent seed of the god, which came forth from him. Amenhotep, however, remained in the queen's favor. Her Majesty praised me. She loved me. She recognized my worth at court. She presented me with things. She magnified me. I increased beyond everything. By regional year two of the young Tomosus the Third, Hatshepsut had her propaganda machine in place and working, and usurped her stepson's position. Okay, now we're going to go into we're going to talk about Queen Hatshepsut, who reigned between 1498 to 1483 BC, and then we're also going to go and talk about further about Tuthmosis the Third, who reigned in 1504 to 1450 BC. Okay, and then after that, we're going to talk about the last pharaoh we will discuss today would be Amenhotep II. So let's get into this. Hatshepsut, as Tuthmosis II had realized early on, Hatshepsut was a strong-willed woman who would not let anyone or anything stand in her way. By year 2 of her co-regency with the child king Tuthmosis III, she had begun her policy to subvert his position. Initially, she had been content to be represented in reliefs standing behind Tuthmosis III and to be identified simply by her titles as Queen and Great King's wife of Tuthmosis II. This changed as she gathered support from the highly placed officials, and it was not long before she began to build her splendid mortuary temple in the Bay of the Cliffs at Deir el-Bahari. Constructed under supervision of the queen's steward, Senetmut, who was to rise to the highest office during her reign. Hatshepsut's temple took its basic inscriptions from the 12th Dynasty temple of Amenhotep adjacent to the site on the south. The final plan of the temple made it unique in Kemetan architecture, built largely of limestone. It rose in 3 broad colonnade-fronted terrace to a central rock-cut sanctuary on the upper terrace. The primary dedication was to Amun, but there were also smaller shrines in Hathor, who earlier had a small cave shrine on the site, and Anubis, respectively located on the south and north sides of the second terrace. A feature of the temple was its alignment to the east directly with the great temple of Amun across the Nile at Karnak. The queen legitimized her rule. Excuse me. Hatshepsut recorded that she had built her mortuary temple as a garden for my father Amun. Certainly it was a garden with small trees and shrubs lining the entrance ramps to the temple. Her focus on Amun was strengthened in the temple by a propaganda relief known as the birth relief on the walls of the northern half of the middle terrace. Her Amun Here, Amun is shown visiting Hatshepsut's mother, Queen Ahmose, while nearby are the appropriate deities of childbirth: the ram-headed Khanum and the frog-headed goddess Hequet, and the 7 fairy godmother Hethers. The thrust of all this was to emphasize that she, Hatshepsut, had been deliberately conceived and chosen by Amun to be king. She was accordingly portrayed with all the regalia of kingship, even down to the official royal false beard. To symbolize her new position as king of Kemet, Hatshepsut took the titles of the female Horus, Wasrekul, king of Upper and Lower Kemet, Ma Kare, truth is the soul of Re, and Ka Nem Met Ta Mun, Hatshepsut, she who embraces Amun, the furthermost of women. The foremost of women. Her coronation as a child in the presence of the gods is represented in direct continuation of the birth relief at Deir el-Bahari, subsequently confirmed by Atum at Heliopolis. The propaganda also indicated that she had been crowned before the court in the presence of her father Tuthmosis the First, who accorded to the inscription deliberately chose New Year's Day as a auspicious day for the event. The whole text is fictitious, and just like her miraculous conception, a political exercise. In pursuing this, Hatshepsut makes great play upon the support of her long dead but still highly revered father, Tuthmosis I. Temples and trading. The cult of Amun had gradually gained in importance during the Middle Kingdom under the patronage of the princes of Thebes. Now the more powerful New Kingdom kings associated the deity with their own fortunes. Hatshepsut had built her mortuary temple for Amun on the west bank and further embellished the god's huge temple on the east bank. Her great major domo Sinnumut was heavily involved in all her building works and was also responsible for the erection of a pair of red granite obelisks to the god at Karnak. Their removal from the quarries at Aswan is recorded in inscriptions there, while their actual transport but ended on low rafts calculated to be over 300 feet, 100 meters long, and 100 feet to 30 meters wide, is represented in reliefs at the Deir el-Bahari temple. A second pier was cut later at Aswan and erected at Karnak under the direction of Sinnumut Kali Amenhotep. One of them still stand in the temple. The queen did not, however, build only to the greater glory of Amun at Thebes. There are many records of her restoring temples in areas of Middle Kemet that had been left devastated under Hyksos. While Hatshepsut is not known for her military prowess, her reign is noted for its trading expeditions, particularly to the land of Punt. probably northern Somalia or Djibouti, a record of which is carved on the walls of her temple. It shows the envoys setting off down the Red Sea with fish accurately depicted in the water, and later their arrival in Punt, where they exchange goods and acquire the fragrant incense trees. Other trading and explorative excursions were mounted to the turquoise mines of Sinai, especially to the area of Sarabat el-Qadem, where Hatshepsut's name has been recorded. The queen's tomb. Hatshepsut had her tomb dug in the Valley of the Kings by her vizier and high priest of Amun, Hatshepsut. She had previously had a tomb cut for her as queen regnant under Tuthmosis II. Its entrance 200 feet to 70 meters, up a 350 feet to 91 meters cliff face in a remote valley west of the Valley of the Kings. This was found by local people in 1916 and investigated by Howard Carter in rather dangerous circumstances. The tomb had never been used and still had the sandstone sarcophagus inscribed for the queen. Carter wrote, "As a king, it was clearly necessary for her to have her tomb in the valley like all other kings. As a matter of fact, I found it there myself in 1903, and the present tomb was abandoned. She would have been better advised to hold to her original plan. In this secret spot, her mummy would have had a reasonable chance of avoiding disturbance. In the valley, it had none. A king she would be, and a king's fate she shared." Hatshepsut's second tomb was located at the foot of the cliffs in the eastern corner of the Valley of the Kings. The original intention seems to have been for a passage to be driven through the rock to locate the burial chamber under the sanctuary of the Queen's Temple on the other side of the cliffs. In the event bad rock was struck and the tomb's plan takes a great U-turn back on itself to a burial chamber that contained two yellow corsets sarcophagus, one inscribed for Tuthmosis I and the other for Hatshepsut as king. The queen mummy has never been identified, although it has been suggested that a female mummy rediscovered in 1991 in KV-21, the tomb of Hatshepsut's nurse, might have been her body. Hatshepsut died in about 1483 BC. Some suggest that Tomosus the Third, kept so long in waiting, may have had a hand in her death. Certainly he hated her enough to destroy many of the queen's monuments and those of her closest adherents. Perhaps the greatest posthumous humiliation she was to suffer, however, was to be omitted from the carved king's list. Her reign was too disgraceful an episode to be recorded. Okay, now we're going to go into Tuthmosis and discuss his reign. Now, this is the period where after Queen Hatshepsut died, Tuthmosis III took on the role as king or pharaoh of Kemet. Excuse me. With Hatshepsut's death, Tomosus the Third came into his rightful inheritance. Sinamut, Hatshepsut's powerful minister and supporter, had died about a year before the queen and could no longer stand in Tuthmosis' way. Hatshepsut had maintained her position with the support of powerful ministers, but above all by virtue of her impeccable royal lineage. Tuthmosis II was to draw on his family credentials because he had been married to the princess Neferhore, daughter of Tomosus II by Hatshepsut. Neferhore died sometime before year 11, so Tuthmosis III was a widower when he came to the throne. He then took Hatshepsut's Mertre as his principal queen, who was to be the mother of his heir Amenhotep II. During Hatshepsut's reign, Tuthmosis had been kept well in the background. From the prowess he later demonstrated on the battlefield, it appears that he probably spent a lot of his time with the army. Kemet control in Syria and the Lebanon had slipped under Hatshepsut, and a number of the local princes had transferred their allegiance from Kemet to the closer and powerful kingdom of Mitanni. This was to change radically with the new king. Once Tuthmosis III had a clear field, he set about expunging the memory of his stepmother Hatshepsut from the monuments. He exacted retribution at her temple at Deir el-Bahari, destroying many of the reliefs and smashing numerous of her statues into a quarry just in front of the temple. The tombs of her courtiers were also attacked. Moreover, the obelisk which Semnumut had proudly brought from the granite quarries at Aswan to Karnak were walled up and their inscriptions hidden. This actually helped to preserve the lower inscriptions in pristine condition, and they have now been revealed again. At Deir el-Bahari, tucked onto a ledge between the southern half of the Queen's Temple and Amenhotep's Middle Kingdom Temple, Tuthmosis built a small temple of his own. Excavated in recent years by the Polish mission, the incredibly fresh condition of these shattered reliefs seems to indicate that the temple was destroyed by a rock fall from the high cliffs above it very shortly after its completion. Nearby, Tuthmosis had a rock-cut sanctuary dedicated to the cow goddess Hetha. The shrine was found by accident in the last century during the clearance work by the Swiss Egyptologist Edouard Nouvel. A sudden rock fall exposed the opening to a painted shrine which local graffiti indicated had been a place of worship until Ramesside times, when it was destroyed by an earthquake. The shrine was dedicated by Tuthmosis III, accompanied in the wall painted by his wife. Mertre. Within the shrine was a large statue of Hetha as a cow walking forward with a standing figure of the king under her dulep and a kneeling figure of Tuthmosis' son and successor Amenhotep II, painted in a profile suckling at her udder, the Napoleon of ancient Kemet. In year 2 of his independent reign, normally his year 23, Tuthmosis III opened up his Near Eastern campaign, and reasonably trustworthy account of the battles was inscribed on the inside wall surrounding the granite sanctuary at Karnak. The author of these so-called annals was the Hatshepsut's royal scribe and army commander Tanunai. He left an inscription in his tomb on the west bank at Thebes, saying, "I recorded the victories he, the king, in parentheses, who won in every land, putting them into writing according to the facts." Tanunai must be one of the earliest official war correspondents, by recording details of the war in the great temple of Karnak. Tuthmosis III was not only glorifying his own name, but also promoting the god Amun, under whose banner he literally marched, and whose estates were to reap such rich rewards from the spoils of war. The whole campaign was a masterpiece of planning and nerve. He marched to Gaza in 10 days, took the city, and pressed on to Yaham, aiming for Megiddo, which was held by the rebellious prince of Kadesh. Here a problem arose as the troops approached Megiddo. There were 3 possible routes into the town. 2 were straightforward and would bring the troops out to the north of the town. The 3rd was through a narrow pass, which the officers were quick to point out would be dangerous and open to ambush, since it was really only wide enough for single file. Will not they ask, horse can't come behind horse, and man behind man likewise? Shall our advance guard be fighting while our rear guard is yet standing yonder in Aruna, but not having fought? The king, however, took the view that the god Amun-Re was on his side, and the officers were normally given the choice of following him through the narrow pass or going the easy way round. Not the least to say, they all submitted to the king's plan. Military terms, this is kind of dangerous, because you can be outflanked. Not only about be outflanked, most likely you'll be trapped in 2 different positions. But he was a king who took chances, and fortunately with these chances he succeeded. Okay, now Tuthmosis marched at the head of the column with almost total disregard for his own personal safety, but the gamble paid off. Emerging from the mouth of the Wadi, he saw that his enemies had wrongly anticipated that he would take one of the easier routes, and had in fact come out between the north and south wings of their army. The next day, battle was joined, and the enemy decisively routed. The latter fled in panic back to Megiddo, where those who were too slow to get in through the gates were hauled up by their clothes over the walls, Unfortunately, the scribe relates the Kemetan troops stop in their headlong pursuit to gather loot. The enemy was thus able to escape and fortify its position inside Megiddo, which had out against the Kemetans until the end of a 7-month siege. In less than 5 months, Tomosus the Third had traveled from Thebes right up the Syrian coast, fought decisive battles, captured 3 cities, and returned to his capital to celebrate his victories. A campaign was launched against Syria every summer for the next 18 years, the Kemetan's navy being extensively used for troop movements up the coast. It all culminated in year 42 with Tuthmosis captured Kadesh, but the list at Karnak detailed over 350 cities that also fell to Kemetan might. Great still commemorate the victories, and there was also a long but now much damaged inscriptions on pylon 7 at Karnak. The 17th campaigns into Western Asia were the military apotheosis of Tuthmosis' reign, and it is not for nothing that he was called the Napoleon of ancient Kemet by the American Egyptologist James Henry Breasted. The king also mounted punitive expeditions into Nubia, where he built temples at Amenhotep and Simna, and cleared Tuthmosis the Third canal in year 50, so that his army would easily pass on its return journey. The king was by now in his 80s. For the last dozen or so years of his life, he was able to rest content that the empire was now widely spread and in good order to be handed on to his heir Amenhotep II. Many temples were enriched and embellished from the spoils of the campaigns, none more so than the temple of Karnak. Wall reliefs near the sanctuary represent some of the gold jewelry, costly furniture, valuable oils, and urgens and other gifts offered by Tuthmosis, as well as the 2 obelisks that were erected, one of which now stands in the Hippopodrome at Istanbul. A great black granite victory stele from Karnak records in 25 lines how the king smote all before him, just as he is represented doing on the back of pylon 7 at Karnak. At the east end of Karnak complex of temples, Tuthmosis built a new temple that is unique in its design, almost design amongst Kemetan temples. Called his festival hall, its unusually shaped columns are said to represent the poles of the king's campaign tent. Behind the hall is a small room with 4 clustered papyrus columns. This is known as the Botanical Garden because of the representations on its walls of the animals and plants that he brought back from Syria in year 25. Queens and burials. Tuthmosis' principal queen was Hatshepsut Murray, but there were other minor queens, several of whom had been acquired almost as diplomatic exchanges. The court was further expanded for a while by a number of foreign princes who were held hostage while they received strict instructions in Kemetan ways. They would have then be returned to their homelands, duly groomed as obedient vassals of Kemet. The reign of Tomosus III was noted for its opulence, and this is reflected in the superb quality of the tombs of some of the high nobles that have survived. Principal amongst these Tomosus the Third. Hold on for a moment. Let me go back to this. The reign of Tomosus III was noted for its opulence, and this was reflected in the superb quality of the tombs of some of the high nobles that have survived. Principles amongst these is that of the Vizier Rekmare, with its teeming scenes of daily life and crafts, and especially the two long inscriptions that provide valuable information on the installation and office of a vizier. The tomb of the high priest of Amun-Re, Min-Kahep Per-Re-Sunab, Murray, religious opposite number, was also nearby. When Tuthmosis the Third died in 1450 BC, his principal queen and mother of his heir, Hatshepsut Murray, survived him into the reign of her son as queen mother. Tuthmosis was interred in a tomb in the Valley of the Kings, with its entrance halfway up the cliff face. Once the burial had been completed, Tuthmosis was now let's go into this. Now before I go on, now it clearly mentions that he was a general of great magnitude, similar to Napoleon. He was the Napoleon of his era. Now, before he began his reign by himself, he had a disdain for Queen Hatshepsut. I would assume because she had taken his throne from him as he's a child, and as he was growing up, she probably purposely kept him in the background, and positioned herself around people who support her reign and keep him in a position of non-significance. And I guess he took it to heart, and he really destroyed her tomb and those who served under her. But things like this happened in that period. So let's go back. Once the burial had been completed, masons hacked away the stone stairway that had led up to the now concealed entrance. Ancient robbers found their way in nevertheless and despoiled the tomb, its principal burial hall, and the four side chambers. When it was rediscovered in February of 1898 by Victor Laurent, all he found was the carved sarcophagus and the sorry remnants of the smashed furnitures and wooden statues. Rather curiously, amongst all this debris, there was no trace of even fragments of a Hatshepsut of the king, and indeed none have ever been recognized. The mummy was missing because it had been discovered 17 years before in 1881 in the Great Royal Cache at Deir el-Bahari, where it appears to have been reburied after year 11 of the 22nd Dynasty, Pharaoh Hatshepsut I, 934 BC. It was identified as the body of Tuthmosis from the scraps of original wrappings still on it, and it laid in its once glided but now stripped original outer coffin. Okay, now we're going to go to his son Amenhotep II. Amenhotep II reigned 1453 to 1419 BC. Amenhotep II seems to have been an athletic youngster. Several representations of the king show him engaged in successful sporting pursuits, and he was keen to establish an equally good reputation in the military field. An opportunity to do just this presented itself early in his reign, when, on receiving the news of the death of Tomosus the Third, the Asiatic cities rose up in revolt. Amenhotep II was not slow in showing the rebels that he was not to be toyed with. In April of year 2, he moved swiftly overland with the army, presumably because the Mediterranean Sea ports were also in revolt. Advanced into northern Palestine, fought his way across the Otis River in Syria, and subdued all before him. One city, Nay, had learnt its lesson under Tuthmosis the Third and welcomed his son. The area of Hatshepsut seems to have been the focal point of the trouble, and Amenhotep II captured 7 princes there, returning with them in the autumn to the temple of his great god Amun at Karnak. He was also accompanied by much booty, which largely went to swell the coffers of Amun. Nubia took the king's attention next in year 3, when he moved south and completed the temples begun by his father at Aswan, on Elephantine Island, and at Amida. From still left by the king at both temples, we learned the fate of the 7 captive princes. The king sacrificed all 7 to Amun in the age-old manner, smiting them with his mace and then hanging them face downwards on the prow of his ship. 6 of them were subsequently hung on the enclosure wall of the temple at Thebes, while the 7th was taken south into Nubia and hung from the walls of Napata, in order to cause to be seen the victorious might of his majesty forever and ever. So you see, the kings of this dynasty didn't play. They they didn't play with their enemies. They handled business. Year 9 saw the king campaigning in Palestine again, but only as far as the Sea of Galilee. Thereafter, for the rest of his 34-year rule, it seems he had made his mark and peace reigned. Amenhotep II was laid to rest in the Valley of the Kings, but not for long, for his tomb was plundered before the end of the 20th dynasty. When Victor Laurent entered it in March of 1898, he found the usual debris, but the king still laid in his sarcophagus, where the priests had partly rewrapped the body after its desecration. Impressions preserved in the resin indicated the jewelry that had once lain on the body. Amenhotep was not, however, alone in his tomb. It had been used by the priests in antiquity as a hiding place for other royal mummies. Okay, so that is the end there of the first 7 pharaohs that we're going to discuss of the 18th dynasty. Now, part 2, as I mentioned, will be on March 14th, and that would start at 5 p.m. Central Time, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 4 p.m. Mountain Time, and 3 p.m. Pacific Time. And we will begin discussing Tuthmosis IV. We'll discuss him in part 2. He would be the start of the last 7 pharaohs of the dynasty. And those last 7 pharaohs of the 18th dynasty are Tuthmosis IV, Amenhotep III, Amenhotep IV, which is also known as Akhenaten, who was the first known individual in history who had created a religion who worshiped one God. And then we would go and talk about Smenkhare, Tutankhamun, and Horemheb, who was the last king of that dynasty. So once again, thank you for joining me here on the Royal House of Ra. I am your host, Amenhotep El Ra, and I look forward in communicating with all of you on the next show, which would be episode 19. So once again, thank you and enjoy the rest of your